Hi, welcome to first part of my two parts overview demonstration video of Mutable Instruments Ambica synthesizer. In the first part, I would like to give you a run-through of Ambica's menu architecture, and in the second part, I will demonstrate sounds of the oscillators, patches and multis. I will not be able to show you in depth all the functions within Ambica, otherwise this video would take twice as long. However, there will be a lot of talking in this part of the video, so bear with me. I've heard Ambica for a couple of weeks now, and there are some functions that I haven't had the chance to explore yet. Also, whilst the user manual is well written, it does not cover some of the functions very well, and some of them at all. A couple of general words about Ambica synthesizer. Ambica is an instrument originally built by Oliver Gillette of Mutable Instruments. It is a hybrid DIY synthesizer which consists of motherboard and 6 voice cards with digital oscillators, analog voltage controlled filters and analog voltage controlled amplifiers. Currently, Mutable Instruments don't sell the components anymore, but these can be purchased from TubeOhm Instruments website, and it seems that the TubeOhm had taken over the project. Ambica is a complete DIY project, which means that you have to buy all the parts, solder and assemble them yourself. Of course, if you are comfortable with assembling electronics. Or you can also ask one of the recommended builders who are listed on Mutable Instruments and TubeOhm websites. Ambica can be configured with 4 different types of voice cards, equipped with different flavored filters, and there are some options for different LCD colors and enclosures. The filter types are 3 types of 4-pole low-pass filters, SMR4, 4P and Polyvox, and a 2-pole state variable filter, which is basically a switchable low-pass, bandpass and a high-pass filter. One can choose to have any combination of voice cards, let's say 4 SMRs and 2 SVFs in one unit or 6 4PSs in one unit. Any combination is really possible. The instructions how to build Ambica are also available on the TubeOhm and Mutable Instruments websites. I highly recommend visiting both websites where you can find more and useful information about Ambica. My Ambica was built by Sebastian through his advertisement on eBay UK, and whilst I am comfortable with soldering the cables, this time I thought that I don't have enough experience in electronics in order to assemble it myself. For my model of Ambica, I have chosen to have 6 state variable filter voice cards. Each voice in Ambica has 2 digital oscillators with 36 oscillator algorithms to choose from. 1 sub-oscillator whose pitch is linked to oscillator 1, white noise generator, controllable amount of fuzzy overdrive and a controllable amount of bit reduction that can be applied to all combined signals. Further, there are 3 patch level LFOs that can be synchronized to the global tempo or external clock, and 1 free running voice LFO. 3 ADSR envelopes, modulation matrix with 14 slots and 4 modulation modifiers, 1 arpeggiator, 1 note step sequencer and 2 step sequencers, which can be set as modulators for destination parameters in the modulation matrix. The flexible mapping of 6 voices can allow for many different combinations. For example, Ambica can be configured as 6 monophonic synthesizers or 2 monophonic and 1 4-voice polyphonic synthesizer at the same time. Few words about connections, which are located on the back panel of the unit. Here you will find AC power jack for external 9V PSU. There is 1 MIDI input and 1 MIDI output. MIDI output by default serves as a MIDI through, but it can also be used to transmit MIDI notes generated by arpeggiator or step sequencer. There is also 1 1/4-inch jack mono output which combines the mix of all voice cards. 6 1/4-inch jack outputs provide individual line outputs, each for 1 voice card. It is worth to mention whilst we're here that the main mix output does not provide a copy of an audio signal, and once the cable has been plugged into the individual output of any selected card, it disables each signal going to the mix output. Here, on the back panel, you will also find the SD card socket for storing and recalling patches, programs and multis, alongside with a history of editing operations for undo and redo actions. On the front panel, there are 9 potentiometers, 1 clickable encoder and the 8 switches with LEDs. Potentiometer on the very top serves as a volume attenuator for mix output. In my setup, it has no function because all voice cards use the individual outputs. The large LCD displays 2 rows of up to 4 accessible parameters assigned to the synthesis functions of Select Synthesis menu page. The 8 switches are used to select synthesis and setting pages in the menu. Some of the pages share the same switch and you have to repeatedly press the switch in order to cycle between subpages. The corresponding LEDs indicate which page is currently active. Clickable encoder is used to scroll between parameters and pages and to fine-tune the value of selected parameter. There is also 7 LEDs located at the bottom left. 6 of them indicate which voice cards are currently active for editing in green color and which voices are currently being played in yellow. The first top LED indicates the speed of currently selected or operated LFO. Let's dive into synthesis menu pages where I will run through Ambica's features. I will start with voice allocation page where we assign our voice cards to the parts. In this page, the first knob of the upper row is used to select parts from 1 to 6. Notice how 6 LEDs at the bottom indicate by a green light which part is currently selected. There is also a neat shortcut. By clicking and holding the first button and turning the encoder, we can scroll through and select different voices. This shortcut eliminates the need of going to the voice page in order to select different voices for editing, and it applies to all synthesis menu pages. Bottom row of LCD displays number of 6 voice cards and their part allocations in square brackets. Single voice can be only allocated to one part at the time and cannot be used by another part at the same time. In order to assign it to the part, it has to be free. If it already has been assigned to the part, it has to be deselected first in order to be assigned to the different part. I hope that makes sense. In my current setup, voice 1 is allocated to part 1, voice 2 to part 2, and voices from 3 to 6 are allocated to part 3. That configuration allows me to have 2 mono synthesizers and 1 4-voice polysynth to be played at the same time. With top second potentiometer, we can change and assign MIDI channels to parts. When Omni is selected with the knob fully counterclockwise, parts respond to all MIDI channels. Of course, parts can share the same MIDI channel. Top third and fourth potentiometers select the note's keyboard range that the part responds to. These can be used to create keyboard splits. Next, the first page of button 6, keyboard and tuning page. This setting page is related to voice allocation page and it is handy for setting up different playing modes, volume and tuning per part. The volume potentiometer is the only place where we can adjust the volume of individual parts. The second top pot is for selecting playing modes for edited parts. In this configuration, I have parts 1 and 2 set to mono modes and part 3 to poly mode. Obviously, polyphony is limited to the number of voices that are allocated to part. For the purpose of this demonstration, I have all individual Ambica's outputs connected to Firewire sound card and then routed to the individual inputs in Apple's Logic. All of 3 parts are set on separate audio channels in Logic. However, for the part 3 I have created track stack in order to control the mix volume of all 4 voices in part 3 with one summing bass. Individual input channels for part 3 allows me to apply different panoramic settings for each of 4 incoming voices. Mono and poly modes are self-explanatory. The way 2 unison mode works: every time you play a single note on a keyboard, it's played by 2 voices at once. What is quite interesting here, because I have all 4 voices allocated to one part, part number 3. Once I play the first note, voices 3 and 4 respond and send the signal. When I play second and different note, Ambica sends the signal from voices 4 and 5. The 4th playing mode is cycle. In this mode, if I play single staccato note, Ambica sends the signal in cycle, starting from second voice, then third, fourth and first and second again, etc. These last 2 playing modes open a new world of playability and sound processing. I could, for example, have different effects applied for all separate voices, and with one note I could create a sequence of different sounds. There is also a 5th mode called chain. This one is for chaining 2 Ambicas for 12-voice polyphony synthesizer. The 3rd top pot enables and disables the legato, and the 4th knob applies amount of portamento. There are also an octave range plus minus 2 octaves range and the tune parameter at the bottom row. The spread function acts as digital artificial detuning for all the voices allocated within part, providing of course that the part has more than one voice assigned to it. There is also setting for different scales, keyboard mappings, which are selected with 4th bottom knob. I haven't tried these scales yet. Let's move to synthesis. You will notice in Ambica all synthesis parameters can be controlled separately for each voice. This is valid as long as all single voices are assigned to 6 separate parts. When the part contains more than one voice, the synthesis parameters are controlled on the part level and all voices in the part inherit its settings. With the first click of the button number 1, we select the oscillator parameters page. Second click takes us to the oscillator's mixer page. I would like to mention that Ambica's firmware is also neatly designed when switching between pages. For example, when the mixer settings are being edited in the second page of the oscillators, and we would like to apply some changes to, let's say, voices page, when returning to the oscillators page, we are taken back to the last previously edited page, which is basically a mixer page. In oscillators page, the top parameters control the settings for oscillator 1 and the bottom parameters for the oscillator 2. With the first pots, we can select one from 36 different waveforms for the oscillators, or to disable the oscillator by rotating fully counterclockwise. Here you will find the usual saw, square, triangle and shine shapes amongst the other more complex shapes. In part 2 of the video I will demonstrate the sounds of oscillators. The second function, the parameter, acts as a shaping variable which morphs selected waveforms into many variations. With the third knob we set the oscillator's pitch in range from -36 to +36 semitones. The tune, oscillator fine-tune, ranges from +1/2 and -1/2 of semitone. When selecting mixer page, here we find the following parameters. The mix, which is a balance for oscillators 1 and 2. This one has 36 steps, with the equal amount of both oscillators in the middle setting at around 31 or 32. The white noise generator amount, sub-oscillator with the choice of square, triangle, poles set at 1 or 2 octaves lower relative to oscillator's 1 pitch. Sub-oscillator can also act as a transient generator with different settings in order to emphasize the attack of the oscillators. When one of the transient generator shapes is selected, the sub-oscillator is disabled. This function acts only as one or the other. It's either sub-oscillator or click generator. Next in line is synchronize and or cross-modulation options. This set how oscillators 1 and 2 are combined together, like phase synchronization of oscillator 2 with relation to oscillator 1. The sixth parameter applies the amount of cross-modulation. All the combined signals can then have an amount of noise overdrive fuzz, and then all the combined signal can be sent to bit crash processor with the selectable amount of sample rate reduction. Button 2 of the menu selects the filter page. In this page, we can adjust filter cutoff frequency, filter resonance, filter modes, low pass, band pass and high pass. These modes only apply to the voice cards equipped with state variable filter. With other three models of voice cards, this function has low pass setting only. Envelope 2, the modulation amount of envelope 2 to filter. LFO2, the modulation amount from LFO2 to filter. By default, envelope 2 and LFO2 are programmed in firmware to control the filter modulation. In order to set the negative modulation amount for LFOs or envelope, they have to be patched in modulation matrix. With the first click of third button, we have an access to controls of 3-part LFOs and 3 ADSR envelopes. The second click of that button gives us an access to the controls of 4th LFO, which is the free running voice LFO. As I mentioned earlier in the introduction, 3-part LFOs can be synchronized to global tempo, and these are best for creating global voice sweeps, tremolo effects, etc. The 4th LFO is specific to each voice. The first stop pod selects one of 3-part LFOs and envelopes for editing. Second pod controls the rate of selected LFO. First values are the note values related to global tempo. Other values are increasing frequencies. With the third pod, we can select one of 20 LFO waveforms. Available shapes range from usual waveforms like triangle and square to more complex and interesting shapes. The 4th parameter is used to change LFOs and envelopes synchronization modes. These are pre-running LFO. Second sets the resetting phase of the LFO every time the new note is played. And the third retriggers the corresponding envelope generator every time the LFO completes its cycle. The bottom 4 pods in this page can be tweaked to change attack, decay, sustain and release of the selected envelope. Settings for 4th LFO, the voice LFO, which are selected with the secondary click, are different to those for LFOs 1, 2, 3. In here we can only control the rate and change the waveform shape. Unlike the other 3 LFOs, voice LFO has only 4 waveforms available, These are triangle, square, sample and hold, and ramp. Okay, let's jump into the modulation matrix with the fourth button. First stop potentiometer selects one of 14 modulation patches. Second, selects one of 25 modulation sources. Amongst the popular sources, we can select one of the 4 modifiers, which I will briefly explain in a minute. The third pot is for selection of modulation destinations. Please note, only the LFO4 can be selected and controlled in destinations. Fourth potentiometer adjusts the modulation amount. Values are bipolar. The modulation amount of patch slot number 14 is always attenuated by modulation wheel. Again, this is pre-programmed in its firmware. The bottom row of LCD in matrix page displays one of 4 modifiers which can be also used as sources for modulations. First pot is for selecting one of 4 modifiers. Modifiers are basically a combination of pairs of modulation sources and can have a set of different actions selected with a fourth pot. These actions require deeper explanation, so I will skip that part in this video. Sequencer and arpeggiator page is accessed with the secondary clicks of keyboard Tune button. In these 2 pages we can select different settings for modulation step sequencers, an arpeggiator and a note step sequencer, and also edit notes per step. Again, I will not be going into deep detail of what each function does. However, I would like to mention a few things here. All the parts in this section follow the global tempo, which can be set to fixed BPM or synchronized to external clock. 2 modulation step sequencers can be freely routed as sources to any modulation destination in modulation matrix. There is 1 note pattern step sequencer, up to 32 steps long, an arpeggiator with selection of 22 different patterns. Step sequencer patterns can be saved separately from programs in the library page. Only 1 sequence can play at a time in selected part. It can be either an arpeggiator or note step sequencer. The second page under the Voices button is for global clock settings of Ambica. Here, the pot 1 sets the master tempo in beats per minute, or if rotated fully counterclockwise, it sets Ambica to receive an external clock. Second knob selects different groove templates with shuffle, swing and the likes. With the third knob we apply the amount of groove. Latch setting is related to behavior of internal clock's release time, which allows internal arpeggiator to keep counting for a while after all keys had been released from keyboard. I am not going to cover library page functions in detail, but in short, this is where we select, copy and save patches, programs, multi-settings and step sequencer patterns. At first, the library can be a bit confusing, but once learned and used to, it's actually quite neatly designed. All individual settings can be saved to SD card with banks numbered from A to Z. My Ambica came with some pre-programmed presets, however, I haven't paid much attention to these. Instead, I quickly began creating my own combinations. The last page I would like to show you is the performance page. Here you can configure the set of 8 controls that you would like to have displayed on one page at the same time. Within each subpage, you can customize up to 8 different parameters from different pages and parts in order to be displayed together on performance page. So far, I've been having a lot of fun with Ambica. Combination of voice configurations with their individual outputs enables for a very complex signal routings. The large choice of oscillator waveforms with a substantial modulation matrix and its modulators allow for complex sounds to be created with Ambica. Both modern and vintage sounding patches can be produced. Ambica has got distinctive sound and, in my opinion, it's a rather dirty sounding synthesizer. The oscillators on its own have a lot of character and sound very different from your usual and also digital VSTs or audio unit plug-in oscillators. Some of these plugins, of course, allow for creation of very complex sounds and are fantastic, but if compared to Ambicas, they mostly have a rather clinical sound. And of course, nothing can beat the hands-on experience of creation of sounds with the physical potentiometers. Before getting my Ambica, I was a little bit worried that I will not like its interface with the constant diving between menu pages. However, whilst Ambica physically hasn't got the knobware function editing, the synthesis menu with its pages is very logically designed and laid out, which allows for tweaking with a little or no effort. With no time, I have learned the structure of synthesis within Ambica. The firmware is an open source code, which means that anyone with an experience in programming can change its code and apply changes to Ambica's behavior. Okay, I hope that you enjoyed this first part video of Mutable Instruments Ambica overview. Please check out part 2, where I will demonstrate the sound of oscillators and also some of the patches and combinations I have created on Ambica. Thanks for watching, subscribe and stay tuned for more videos in the future. Cheerio!